Hey everybody, welcome to the Hoporenkv Native American Podcast, where we discuss focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. I'm Brooke Warrington, the Training and Development Specialist here at the Seminole Tribe of Florida Native Learning Center. Here with me is our Training and Development Coordinator, Brianna Birch. And today's podcast is going to feature special guests from Travois. We have Phil Glynn, the president of Travois, and we also have Adam Rose here, who's Director of Partnerships and Growth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So today we are going to be talking about the low-income housing tax credits that have come out in this new bill. So do you guys mind reminding us how low-income housing tax credits, like what they are, how it works?
Yeah, so just real quick to introduce Travois, we work exclusively with Native American tribes, tribal housing authorities, economic development entities primarily to access these two funding resources that we're going to talk about today. One being low-income housing tax credits for rental housing and new markets tax credits for things like clinics and schools. Low-income housing tax credits, it's the biggest program for affordable housing in the country, and tribes deserve the same access to that tool as every other affordable housing developer. So our role is we just work alongside our tribal partners to help access what is the biggest program for affordable housing development in the country.
It's completely different from the new markets tax credits, right?
Yeah. Phil, you want to take that one?
Yeah, the low-income housing tax credit, as Adam said, is there to support the construction of new rental homes, apartment buildings, communities where people live. And the idea of the new markets tax credit program is to finance the organizations that create jobs and provide services in those communities. Generally speaking, there's a lot of overlap between the investors that invest in low-income housing tax credits and new markets tax credits, and a lot of the people who help make those projects happen. Like Travois, for example, we are a consultant to tribal housing authorities in assisting tribes with doing low-income housing tax credit projects, but we are also a community development entity, which is the term for the intermediaries that get the allocations of new markets tax credits and direct those to projects. But they are different, and they cannot be used to jointly finance the exact same assets, but they can be used in concert. And many tribes around the country have done this, used both, because to have a thriving community, there have to be beautiful, safe, high quality places to live that are large enough to accommodate families, but there also needs to be, places to work and places to go to school and places to get healthcare. And that's what new markets tax credits are for.
That's amazing that y'all provide that help to tribes. How long have the housing tax credit programs been in existence?
Yeah, so it's interesting because this program goes all the way back to the Reagan administration. Back in 1986, Congress at that time decided that they wanted to somehow incentivize private investment into affordable housing. So Congress adopted this very large program called Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. LIHTC is the acronym. And that continues to be the biggest resource for affordable housing in the country. So our work started in 1995. At that time, there had not been a tribe that had been able to successfully navigate how to access what had become and was intended to be the biggest program for affordable housing in the country. And that's where our work continues to center today, is working alongside our tribal partners, not as the owner of the project, but as a co-collaborator, a partner to help access this big funding resource.
And then when it came time to create the new markets tax credit program, which was in 2000, Congress looked at the success that the low-income housing tax credit had helped housing authorities and housing developers to have, and kind of said to each other, well, we should create a companion program for economic development that's based on the same principles as the low-income housing tax credit. And there are a lot of technical differences, but generally it's the same idea. It's that organizations in low-income communities, whether they're developing housing or building health centers or starting businesses or whatever, they're engaged in activities that these programs want to support. And those activities, for lack of a better term, they create tax credits. And the difficult work that we all do is to go match up investors with projects and to do all the legal and technical structuring it takes to monetize those tax credits that are created by those activities. So anyway, getting back to the history of the new markets tax credit, since the low-income housing tax credit by the year 2000 had become so successful, and Travois was starting to assist tribes, and those tribes were seeing success in using the program to meet their own housing needs, Congress creates the new markets tax credit in the year 2000. It was one of the last things that happened under the Clinton administration, actually. That program first expired or needed an extension in 2007. And since then, Congress has acted 8 times to extend the New Markets Tax Credit program, sometimes 1 year at a time, sometimes 2 or 3, or sometimes 5 years at a time. And I know that we'll probably talk about this later, but that's what makes this most recent reconciliation bill that passed, the New Markets Tax Credit portion of it, so exciting, is that the New Markets Tax Credit is now a permanent part of the tax code. So tribes that have long-term plans to build things that could benefit from New Markets Tax Credits don't have to be concerned, is this program still going to be there by the time our project is ready to go? Because this is now, like the low-income housing tax credit, a permanent part of the tax code and can be a part of tribal housing and economic development and tribal colleges and individually owned tribal member businesses. This can be part of their long-range strategic planning now, and that's really exciting.
That's fantastic news indeed. Is this specifically like a tribal program, or is this kind of for other groups as well?
No, so in both instances, both programs are not limited just for tribes participating, but again, tribes have a housing need oftentimes, and so they can compete alongside all the other developers on the housing tax credit side. On the New Markets Tax Credit side, again, it's not a program specifically for tribes. In the current round of allocation, there'll be about 10 billion with a B of allocation to be made. That's distributed to about 200 different organizations, one of them being Travois, a CDE, and those CDEs act as the intermediaries to put that $10 billion of allocation directly into projects. So what is different about Travois and our commitment is that our deployment is exclusively to benefit tribes. So there are just a handful, maybe 3 or 4 total CDEs, entities that tribes partner with to receive tax credits directly, that are committed exclusively to tribal projects. That's not to say they couldn't work with another entity, another CDE that may have allocation, but there's only a handful of those, including Travois, that are exclusively committed to deploying allocation to tribal projects.
Okay, great. And why is this in particular such an incredibly valuable tool for tribes to have in their toolbox?
Yeah, again, I'll let Phil take the New Markets Tax Credit portion of the question, but on the housing tax credit portion, it can easily cover upwards of 70, 80, perhaps even more of a project's cost. So let's say a tribe is developing a $10 million project. This funding resource, very viably covers 7 million of that, minimizing the amount of contribution that's required from the tribe. And so the other thing that's really kind of interesting and cool about it is that tribes can use their limited NAHASDA block grant alongside housing tax credits. The two programs work incredibly well together. So maybe a tribe is developing 30 homes for families, and that's roughly a $10 million project. 7 million of that could come from proceeds from the housing tax credit program, the portion that doesn't have to be paid back. And that would only require, in this hypothetical example, 3 million of investment from the tribe. But again, it's a program, an idea where most of the funding can be covered by this program called housing tax credits, minimizing or enabling the tribe to do a project with other sources as well, but it becomes a much more manageable project if that gap to be filled is only $3 million compared to $10 million.
Exactly. Okay.
And then the way that I would answer it from the perspective of New Markets Tax Credits, the genius of the New Markets Tax Credit program, in my opinion, was that can be used for a wide diversity of project types. When Congress created the program, they did not say, here is what we want you to finance with New Markets Tax Credits. Rather, they said, here's a short list of things that you cannot do with New Markets Tax Credits. And I may be leaving something out, but generally it's you cannot use New Markets Tax Credits to finance gaming, farming, liquor stores, massage parlors, or projects that are purely rental housing, because that's what Congress had already created the low-income housing tax credit to do. And this is not in the rules, but an industry practice that has developed over time is that New Markets Tax Credit projects tend to be large. They have development costs of $5 million or more. Historically, Travois has generally invested New Markets Tax Credits in projects with total development costs of between $5 and $25 million. So what I think is really exciting about the New Markets Tax Credit program, and I think what could really get the wheels turning of tribal leaders and economic development officials who, now that the program is permanent, can start to make long-term plans, is to ask, okay, what are our needs and how could those potentially overlap with new markets tax credits? We do not decide what the priority of a community should be, and really no CDE that's getting allocations of tax credits should be the one saying, here's what we think good economic development really is. Economic development is only successful if the vision comes organically from the community. And what that allows us to do is to develop relationships with leaders in all these different communities and ask them basically, what are your needs and goals? What's your vision for the future? And because, again, there's this short list of stuff you can't do, it really opens up the conversation to all these other things. So just recent examples are of tribes working with us and with the other tribally focused CDEs that Adam referred to, using new markets tax credits to finance hotels, grocery stores, infrastructure projects, for sale housing, home ownership projects, health centers, and really anything that's not on that short list of stuff you can't do is on the table. And there may well be things that that I'm describing that are limited, and beyond those there may be other groups that have resources available for tribes that might have other options. We should note too that Travois has been among the CDs that are focused on working with tribal nations. We've been doing it the longest, and I think probably at this point we've done the most. But we have great partnerships with other organizations that also devote their new markets tax credits exclusively to tribal communities. The Chickasaw Nation Community Development Endeavor, which is the CDE owned by the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma. Native American Bank is a CDE. And sometimes there are groups that are not 100% focused on Indian country, but who've devoted a portion of their activities to that. An example of that would be a California-based organization called Clearinghouse CDFI. So that's all a very long way of answering your question of what makes it a good program. And I think what makes it a strong program is its flexibility.
Yeah, Phil, there's two big categories that I didn't hear you say. One being education. So things like Head Starts, schools, tribal colleges, all of those are absolutely eligible for new markets tax credits. The other one, which you may have mentioned in passing, healthcare projects. So things like treatment facilities, general practitioner offices, office space for administrative staff, anything healthcare or education related. Those are certainly priority projects that tribes are continuing to push forward on a daily basis. This is a resource that fits within that capital stack to make those projects possible.
Well, we definitely commend you for all the incredible work that y'all have been doing, and especially for how long. That's amazing. Are these able to be used coincide with NAHASDA? And what about other grant programs like the competitive IHBG?
Yeah, I mean, these are two tools, housing tax credits and new markets tax credits, that are ultimately part of a much bigger capital stack. So I think the thing that excites us about the housing tax credit side as it relates to NAHASDA is that the two programs work incredibly well together, and that everyone knows that NAHASDA is underfunded. Everyone understands that tribes could use more NAHASDA funds. But this is another tool, along with things like the affordable housing program through the Federal Home Loan Bank, a totally separate grant program. But all of those things can stack well together, again, with like competitive IHBG, to make a project successful and to be able to build at a larger scale to get more families into homes in a shorter period of time. So instead of a tribe using their limited NAHASDA funds to build 5 or 10 homes in a given year, they could build 40 or 50, layering it with a program like housing tax credits to be able to build at a bigger scale, take advantages of today's construction costs versus 5 or 10 years down the road. All of those are very, very important strategically in advancing housing interest and also minimizing their investment into the project.
And it's similar with new markets tax credits. Again, since it was based on the same idea, principles of low-income housing tax credits, the key to new markets is this idea of leveraging, that you use the sources of funding that you have that aren't enough to build the project you need, and then you use those to leverage new markets tax credits. And new markets have been combined well with a wide variety of different grant programs within the government, different types of loan guarantee programs. Also, there's been a lot of philanthropy and foundation money that's gone into projects that also benefit from new markets tax credits. Also, Grants, there's a lot of exciting work going on of tribes making loans and grants to each other. So there's a lot of intertribal grant financing that has been part of New Markets Tax Credit projects. And then, of course, banks are big participants in this program. So you can combine New Markets Tax Credit financing with a loan from a bank. And getting back to Native American Bank, that's another area where they've been very active and have really played a really productive and helpful role in making lots of different types of New Markets Tax Credit projects happen. One thing that you may have been, I guess, alluding to in your question was, can New Markets Tax Credits and low-income housing tax credits be used together on the same project? And the answer to that is no, they're really for different purposes, but we would really encourage anyone out there listening or watching who is in a position of making decisions about how tribes invest the resources they have to do development, that they can be used in concert. What this, economic development, housing development is not about just building buildings. It's about building community. And a great example of this would be Ho-Chunk Village in Nebraska. So Ho-Chunk Incorporated, which is the economic development arm of the Winnebago tribe, has built this beautiful, walkable, mixed income community that includes both rental housing, for sale housing, but also offices and manufacturing facilities and grocery stores and all the things that people need living in a community. And so we would really encourage people. And again, what's exciting about the New Markets Tax Credit now being permanent is they can be put into the kind of long-term planning of groups that want to do economic development and who have the land to do it and have the money to do it and have that, if that's their priorities and their outlook, to do development in that way, to do these integrated developments where you have housing within walking distance of schools, within walking distance of jobs, to just make commutes shorter, make life easier for people in the community. That New Markets Tax Credits and low-income housing tax credits work really well together in the sense that they help finance the different pieces of the puzzle that help make up the built environment of a successful community.
One other idea that comes to mind related to your question about NAHASDA and its integration with these funding resources is that there's we're very excited about a current project right now. We believe it's the first tribal project ever to use New Markets Tax Credits alongside NAHASDA funds specifically for home ownership housing. So thinking to this larger need of middle income housing that maybe has some less restrictions as far as the incomes and the population living in those units, absolutely a viable path where New Markets Tax Credits can be layered alongside NAHASDA to develop a home ownership project. And that's something new and frankly a tool that we continue to be excited about for tribes to use and benefit from in the future.
Awesome. And I know that you guys said that some of these programs can kind of be layered together. Could they also use the Title VI secured loan as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Title VI is a loan guarantee program under NAHASDA. Again, it's debt that has to be repaid. So there may not necessarily be a need or a desire to use that, but there could be a very strategic reason or lots of good reasons where debt fits into that larger capital stack. So let's say a tribe says, hey, we're going to embark on a project to build 40 homes for families, but we need infrastructure to go with that. Perhaps they use Title VI loan guarantee as a part of that financing to finance more than just the 40 units. Maybe they build out all of the infrastructure for 100 homes, and then they think about how they build those homes in phases over, a course of 3 or 5 years. Absolutely, Title VI could be part of that piece as far as the infrastructure, but it could also be used alongside tax credits and NAHASDA funds to help fill any remaining gap to make a project financially viable.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. We do know that, here in the United States, we are in an affordable housing crisis. It impacts many communities, not just Native American tribes. But why would that context be important to the discussion when you're discussing housing tax credits?
Yeah, I think the idea there is that the expansion of this program is not new to the current administration. The discussions around expanding the housing tax credit program go back as far as the first Obama administration, to be honest with you. So everyone kind of has recognized at the congressional level that additional support for the housing tax credit program is needed. Frankly, it's a bipartisan program that has wide bipartisan support. It's in every single state. It's in every single county. So what's very interesting is that this bill that just passed most recently under the current administration, finally those provisions, after years and years of kind of the industry working around expansion of the program has seen now the biggest increase in its 40-year history. So what Congress did with this most recent bill is they expanded the low-income housing tax credit program by 12%. That's not directly to benefit tribes, but the more resource that is available across the country, the more access there is for tribes to continue to tap into that resource. The bigger the program is, the more that there's opportunity to talk about tribal set-asides in states where that's not yet applicable. So that expansion of the program just gives continued availability for more projects to be done, more tribes to benefit from the program. So regardless of where you may feel about the bill, one way or the other, there are significant enhancements to the housing tax credit program specifically as far as it being expanded by 12%. And that expansion will enable tribes to continue to use the tool and have better access to the tool in the future.
And also, one of the reasons that we are in an affordable housing crisis in the U.S. is not just the lack of financing or insufficient financing to build homes and apartments for people, but it's that homes and apartments aren't always able to be built in the right places where people are and people need them. And sometimes they can't be built in certain communities because of a lack of infrastructure. What we see a lot of at Travois is tribal housing leaders who say, I have families who are ready to rent or buy these homes. I have the money I need to construct these homes, but I cannot build this community or this neighborhood yet because we don't have the resources to extend water, power, high-speed internet, roads, sidewalks, all the infrastructure that we need in order to create viable sites for these homes. And I think that's where, again, now that it's a permanent program, thanks to the advocacy of tribes across the country, and I want to make sure we recognize that too, what a key role that tribal communities played in this fight to make the new markets tax credit permanent. Is that
and the tax credit program expansion too, Phil.
Exactly. Yeah, and the low-income housing tax credits for sure also, is that maybe the way to think about how new markets tax credit fit into the picture of tribal housing leaders' ability to address the affordable housing issues in their own community is that, again, maybe the problem hasn't been the lack of funding to build homes, it's been this lack of infrastructure. And since new markets tax credits can be used for infrastructure, that can now be part of the plan. We've done several infrastructure investments at Travois through the new markets tax credit program. And Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think pretty much every single one of them, the reason that the tribe wanted to do it was because there was either a healthcare facility or a group of homes that they wanted to build, but they couldn't until that infrastructure project got done.
Yeah, or both.
So we've talked about a lot of the positives that kind of go along with this. Are there any short-term challenges that might happen as a result of this increase of housing tax credits?
Yeah, I think on the housing tax credit side, it's important for tribes to kind of go into this funding mechanism with eyes wide open. That the caveat, if you will, maybe that's a too harsh of a term, but the set-asides, the income of families that will be targeted with the low-income housing tax credit program is a little bit lower than NAHASDA. So typically a project will have some 60% area median income households. They may have some 50%, and they may have as low as 30% area median income households. So that is a difference compared to NAHASDA on its own, where families 80% or below can be targeted with NAHASDA funded projects. But that's sort of the downside, if you will, of this really, really big funding mechanism that can cover most of a project's cost. I think the other thing to think about in that context is that oftentimes there may be a population in those income brackets that's absolutely appropriate that the tribe is trying to serve. And maybe they look at their waiting list and say, hey, it's not a huge stretch for us to be willing to serve families at, say, a 50% area median income level. It's just another tool and another component to their overall housing infrastructure and housing availability. It gives more opportunities to serve those lower income families. It's just, the reality is you have to kind of go in eyes wide open that it is slightly deeper income targeting requirements than just NAHASDA on its own.
And I also I just want to recognize the fact that, we at Travois are very happy that the new markets tax credit has been made permanent, and we are very happy about the low-income housing tax credit provisions that are in this bill. And we are very proud of the small role that we played in that, and we are very grateful to tribes for the much, much bigger role they played in advocating for those provisions. But with respect to challenges, I do think it's also worth recognizing that this legislation is huge, and it covers almost every area of the economy and the society. And so while we're really happy about the new markets tax credit and low-income housing tax credit provisions, we don't want anyone out there that is a tribal leader or works for a tribe to think that we're blind to the fact that there are other things this bill did that create a lot of challenges for people, and that that are going to make it harder to generate the renewable energy that's necessary in this country, that are going to make it harder for some of the obligations of the government in general to be funded. So, we recognize that this piece of legislation is far from perfect, but we do think also that these particular provisions we're discussing today really help our clients take the work they've been doing for over 20 years to the next level.
So I know that you touched a little bit regarding the bill that was recently passed the past 2 weeks, but can you just provide a little more information about the bill and what does the bill do exactly?
Well, I wouldn't try to say what the bill does exactly, because again, it was done through a process called reconciliation, which is a process that allows the party in power to enact legislation that, again, covers almost every area of the economy and the society. But the parts of the bill, so we've covered a lot, and we'll keep talking about the expansion of low-income housing tax credits and permanence for the new markets tax credit. But if I was going to try to sort of summarize the other aspects of the bill that received a lot of media attention, and Adam helped me out here, but I would say that the bill extended the tax cuts that were the primary economic policy of the first Trump administration. So there's an extension of the 2017 TCJA tax cuts. There was they essentially rescinded a lot of the clean energy tax credits that the United States renewable energy, which is undergoing a boom, is based on. There are changes to the Medicaid program that I think a lot of board members and CEOs and medical directors of a lot of rural hospitals around the country are really concerned about. And I know that there's already some efforts underway in Congress to maybe realize, okay, there have been unintended consequences of this bill that are going to hurt our rural hospitals, and we need to do something to fix it. So I think that there probably will be, action, maybe even in this Congress, but certainly in future Congresses, especially if there is a change in control of the House to change what was just passed.
As far as the new market tax credits go, how should tribes continue to think about this as a funding source for them in the future, moving
forward? Tribes should keep a couple of basic things in mind. The first is, like Adam said at the beginning, that not all of a project gets funded with the new markets tax credit proceeds. The way a typical new markets tax credit deal works, think of a hypothetical simple project. Let's just say that a tribe is going to build a $10 million grocery store. $2 to $2.5 million of that cost can be covered with new markets tax credits. That's money that comes from a tax credit investor that does not need to be repaid. It is in place as a loan for 7 years. And at the end of the 7th year, the tax credit investor can walk away from that project, and that investment that they made converts to the tribe's own equity. It almost becomes like a grant. And the reason that that's possible is that these new markets tax credit investors, their return on investment comes solely in the form of tax benefits. So they put cash in, but they don't get a return on investment like a typical investor would by getting their money back. They get new markets tax credits, tax savings. The tax savings they receive are larger than the upfront investment of cash that they make. So that's why that's possible. So then the obvious question for anyone out there listening who's trying to raise money for projects is, okay, well, where does the other $7.5 to $8 million for this hypothetical grocery store come from? And that could be a combination of any of the following things. And Adam, let me know if I'm forgetting anything, but bank loans, federal grants, foundation grants, tribal funds. And to answer your question about how should tribes be thinking about this, I guess keep that basic principle in mind, that this is a leveraging program, that it's a way for you to think about it a couple of different ways. We see people really coming to the new markets tax credit program with a variety of motivations on a continuum, starting at what I guess let's call it like early, middle, and late stage of a project. On the early stage, often we work with tribes who say, we have an empty piece of land. We know that we want to build a daycare facility on this land. We know that it's going to cost $15 million. And we have spent the last several years finding all these different sources of money, but we are absolutely maxed out now between all these grant making agencies and our own funds and our bank. We have $12 million, but what we really want is a $15 million building. So they access New Markets tax credits. New Markets tax credits provides that $3 million of gap financing. We have a $15 million building that's fully funded, and everybody says, great, we've done our job, we've got the money we need, let's start building the building. And then we break ground. That's one way of doing it. Quite often what we see is we get a phone call from a health director, an education director, a tribal council member saying, hey, we are halfway under construction with a building. And one of two things has happened. Either the construction costs have gone up because of some type of environmental issue or land issue or construction cost issue. Of course, there's a great deal of uncertainty related to construction costs now with the current administration's tariff policies. Or a tribal council member might say, hey, I just attended a conference at Native American Finance Officers Association or the National American Indian Housing Council or NCAI, and I found out about this thing called New Markets tax credits. And what they say to themselves when they hear about it is, oh my gosh, we got underway with a project that we had really wanted it to be a $15 million child care facility, but because of a lack of resources through the value engineering process, we cut that back to build a $12 million building because that's all the money that we had. But now, even though we're halfway under construction, we just found out about New Markets tax credits. We want to use that as a way to add back things into the budget that had to be cut out during that value engineering process. So whether you're at the sort of more typical or conventional scenario you might think of putting together every single dollar before you even put a shovel in the ground, think about New Markets tax credits as part of the financing stack that you're planning for. If you're in that other scenario, which really has become kind of more common for us, where a project's either under construction or nearly completed with construction, and you're thinking to yourself, we've built the building that we need, but it's not really the building that we want. New Markets tax credits might be the thing that helps you add those things that had to be cut out of the budget due to economic or financial constraints at the outset, or financial constraints that were created because of the unpredictability and the cost of building materials or access to contractors or the availability of labor or whatever.
It could also very viably be a scenario where, again, a $15 million project, and maybe the tribe has invested some of their own funds into that project, and they would rather use someone else's money and use a resource that doesn't have to be paid back so that they could redeploy their own money into another healthcare investment or infrastructure for housing or something completely different altogether. That's another very plausible way that New Markets tax credits can benefit tribes, is enable them to free up their own money, own investment, enable them to deploy that into something else altogether.
So now that this bill's passed, I know we've dug into kind of a lot of the details, but if you were going to give our listeners kind of some like final takeaways, some positives, like some hope for the future now that this has passed, what would kind of be like your main tenets that everyone can look forward to and kind of see as silver lining against some of the other parts that don't have to do with, the tax credits or are going to help with tribal construction?
Well, I mean, I think on the housing tax credit side, it's understanding that, again, this is a resource that covers 70 to 80% of a very large project's cost and doesn't have to be paid back. And that resource continues to be there. It's competitive. You have to apply through the State Housing Finance Agency, but that's something that we do every single day, is help navigate that competition and help tribes be able to compete. I think our track record of helping in that capacity on over 230 projects is representative that tribes can in fact and do in fact compete very, very well, and that they should have the same access as every other affordable housing developer. So that resource will continue to be there. If it's a question about capacity or, hey, we haven't necessarily used that tool before, or how does it work with NAHASDA? That's the other piece that we do every single day, is we understand that this is not a resource that you're going to jump right into. Everyone on the team, the council, the housing board, everyone has to understand, and it's to the project's advantage for everyone to understand how it's going to work and how it's going to operate. we help with that education part every single day. And so we want to expand the access for tribes to have as many tools as possible. And this is a big one, and tribes should have it on their radar for that reason.
And for me, the positive takeaway on the new markets tax credit side is that a lot of the conversations that we've had at our, for example, at our annual conference, or when Adam goes to visit with tribal councils or other tribal leaders, because the new markets tax credit has been a short-term thing in the past and was going to expire, it's really forced conversations to focus on, okay, what are you building in the next 12, 18, 24 months only? And that has made sense because that's been the runway of the tax credits and their availability. But now that it's permanent, to me, the biggest takeaway is not only does it help all these projects that are ready to go right now, but now it allows us to have conversations, and it allows tribal leaders to factor this into their thinking of what's happening 5 and 10 years down the road.
And frankly, also benefit from the education process that tribes want and need, and everyone will benefit from understanding how it works. So, it's getting council on board, it's getting your legal team on board, getting your finance team on board. And that process takes time in order for the tribe to be able to exercise its own sovereignty to say, hey, this is in our interest. This is going to be to our benefit. We're making decisions on our own terms about what's in the best interest of our community. And that process, frankly, takes time. And so as projects are planned and laid out and thought about for the future, there's just more opportunity for tribes to continue to build that capacity and understand how it works to their benefit.
Great. And as we just kind of wrap up, because I want to give you all a chance, I want to combine kind of two questions that I think that is important, where I want you guys to spotlight yourselves. So can you both just elaborate on any roles that your team has played in relation to the new markets tax credit program, or roles you may have played, and how it fits into the bill that was just recently passed? And then I'll kind of ask my second part of my question.
Sure.
Yeah, so here's what we do with the new markets tax credit. In order to make a new markets tax credit deal happen, the most important piece of the puzzle is there has to be a great project. That's obviously not us. That's a tribe that says our goal is to have childcare for our employees, or our goal is to have excellent healthcare, or our goal is to pursue this or that business opportunity to create jobs for our people. None of this is possible without the forward-thinking vision of tribal leaders and economic development officials. So that's got to happen first. Where we come into the picture is to facilitate this conversation, where then tribal leaders have to say, okay, that's our goal. We have limited money. How do we fill the gap in between? And we fill that gap with new markets tax credits in two ways. We are a community development entity, or CDE, and we compete every year for allocations of new markets tax credits of our own. That means that when we're successful in getting those allocations, as we have been now for 2 rounds in a row, we decide in partnership with our advisory board which projects to invest that money in. Now, sometimes there have been in the past, and there probably will be in the future years, where we do not receive our own allocation of new markets tax credits. So the second role we play is, when we can't be the CDE that has the tax credits, we can act as a consultant to help tribes access those tax credits from other players. As we said before, there are several other CDEs already that are in this industry that use new markets tax credits, and probably now that it's permanent, there will be new entrants that are CDEs that are focused on, or maybe want to expand their activities working with tribes. And our role as a consultant is going to be to help them find the best possible projects, because whether Travois is the CDE providing the allocation or not, what's in all of our interests is to see that the maximum amount of new markets tax credit funding possible is flowing to tribal communities. Because as we said at the beginning of this conversation, new markets tax credits, like low-income housing tax credits, is a program that's meant to benefit the entire country. And so what we all need to be doing is speaking as much as possible kind of with one voice to policymakers, but also to the other CDEs and to the other investors, and saying, we understand that all communities across the country need economic development, but we believe strongly that economic development projects sponsored by tribes are the best economic development projects, because they serve the people that need this benefit the most. Tribes are engaged in some of the most innovative economic development activities of any communities in the country. And then the thing that we really also try to repeat as much as possible to our friends in the investor community who maybe don't have a lot of experience working with tribes is that tribal partners, these are the safest investments that you can make. You know, when you're investing money, your fear is always, okay, is my partner really going to be there for the long term? Well, it's impossible to imagine an economic development partner who has that long-term vision on the same level as a tribal nation. I mean, these are groups that are thinking generations down the road. And so they're not going to make short-term decisions, and they're not going to back out of their commitments, because their commitment isn't just they don't just have a commitment to this project life cycle. Their commitment to economic development is generational.
Thank you so much for that, Phil. And just one last question. If tribes have a project that needs additional capital that does not have to be repaid, whether it's short-term or long-term, what should they do to connect with your team just to kind of learn more and to integrate with this source as a funding mechanism?
They should call Adam. Adam is our Director of Partnerships and Growth. And Adam's, like, I'm a specialist in the New Markets Tax Credit Program, and I have some other responsibilities at Travois that kind of prevent me from doing this as well as Adam does. But what Adam's really great at is listening. And as people describe the struggles that they're facing, but what their goals are, what's happening in his mind is, okay, which funding resource that I'm an expert in can I connect them with and match them up to? So I'll leave it to Adam to provide his contact information, but basically the answer to that question is call Adam, because he's aware of, okay, what are the tax credit allocations Travois currently has, what have we applied for, and what's the availability of tax credits among our other CDE and investor partners.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality to it is that, you know, we recognize that these are two very, very important resources, but at the same time, it's also, you know, what can we do? Are there other connections to other groups, like Phil mentioned, like Native American Bank or other lenders, or, you know, how can we help in that capacity as well? And so while access to these two particular tools is very valuable, the other thing that we're very willing to do is to extend that our kind of own network of resources that might be out there to benefit tribes and tribal projects, whether that's contractors or whether that's, you know, a expert in another completely unrelated field. Like, we feel we have as much responsibility and role to help in that capacity as well. And frankly, like, that the way that projects get done is by all of those players working together. And so that's as much of a motivator for us as actually helping deploy these funding resources called New Markets Tax Credits and Housing Tax Credits.
Thanks so much for sharing all that, gentlemen. As we kind of start to wind down on the conversation, we of course want to thank you for joining us today and for going into all this important information. You know, this is your area of expertise, and it was so wonderful to hear it from folks who understand it, because, you know, to us kind of regular people who don't really know all of this language, when you do try to kind of dissect a lot of the language in that bill, it can be quite daunting.
Yeah.
You know, so we really appreciate you lending your expertise and breaking it down for us. Do you have any kind of final parting thoughts that you would want to let our audience know?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I want to say is I just want to commend the Native Learning Center and this platform that you have for tribes and for your expertise across all of these sectors. You know, you admit that you don't know everything about this bill. Phil and I don't either. But, you know, your expertise in helping tribes access these resources across grant writing, HR, federal requirements, procurement, bills coming out is such a tremendous resource and such a huge benefit of, again, like leveraging the limited NAHASDA dollars that are helping support this to make information that is so critically important to tribes to move their communities forward. You know, that to me can't be overstated. And so, again, we want to thank the Native Learning Center for continuing your work, whether it's clean energy or infrastructure. Again, like, the opportunity that you're providing through this platform can't be overstated either.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's so lovely. We do take pride in our work. We really enjoy what we do. And yeah, kind of our mindset is like, you know, if we don't know, we will find somebody who does. So thank you so much for saying that. That was really kind.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us as well. As always, thank you for listening to the Hoporenkv Native American Podcast. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please also visit our website, nativelearningcenter.com, to find more information on upcoming webinars and trainings. Also, feel free to contact our website with any episode ideas that you would be interested in exploring. And until then, this is the Native Learning Center, and we hope to connect with you again soon. Be sure to come back for more content. Thank you both. We thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for giving us so much good information. And we're so happy and so thankful that you're, expanding and doing such great things within the Native American community. And we hope that you guys have a great rest of your weekend.
Same to you. Thank you both.
Thank you. And in order for y'all to be able to go ask Adam, we are going to include his contact information in the episode resources. So if you are out there part of a tribe and you would like to kind of consult with them and find out more about their services, you will be able to check out our episode resource links to do that.